Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1113 for June 15th, 2025. Coming up in a few minutes.
I just think, whiskey is meant to be open and shared. It's a great way to experience something, experience time, experience the past, and so that passion just continues to grow.
Mark Wade is a collector of vintage Prohibition-era whiskeys and one of the founders of the Vintage Whiskey Society. Part of his collection went on the auction block at Sotheby's this month, including some whiskeys made by the legendary Mary Dowling, who we discussed on the show a couple of weeks ago. I'll talk with Mark Wade later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. We'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, and on Behind the Label, how one Irish distillery is using nanotechnology to improve the taste of its whiskeys. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Hello, Gabriel Cardarella for Jewers. The 2025 release of our Jewers 19-Year-Old Champions Edition is a masterpiece, crafted for those who appreciate the finer things, whether on the course or in a glass. More on that in a moment.
Let's begin with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. The Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame announced its class of 2025 this week. The honorees include Craig Beam, the longtime Heaven Hill master distiller, now at Jackson Purchase Distillery. I believe he may be the first third-generation member of the Hall of Fame, following his father Parker and grandfather Earl Beam. Mary Dowling, who we discussed with Kaveh Zemanian on the show a couple of weeks ago, is also on the list, along with veteran distiller and consultant Larry Ebersold and former Kentucky State Senate Majority Leader Damon Thayer. Brown-Forman's Master Distiller Emeritus Chris Morris is the winner of this year's Parker Beam Lifetime Achievement Award. I spoke with Chris after the announcement.
Well, I was so shocked and honored, Mark, because of how, at least I believe, how prestigious this award is because of the people who have won it before. So I couldn't have been more proud.
What does Parker Beam mean to you in the heritage of this award?
For one thing, I knew Parker and was able to interact with him at the very end of his long, illustrious life, and of course know Craig very well, his son, who's being honored also in September. So it meant a lot. And then the fact that Bill Samuels and Jimmy Russell and Max Shabira and Evan Kulstein and, of course, the great Ken Lewis, all are former award winners, made it very special for me.
We haven't talked about this in a long time, but how did you get your start 50 years ago?
I started at Brown-Forman because my mother and father had been at Brown-Forman. My father was currently at Brown-Forman 50 years ago. And I just came in as a Brown-Forman baby.
What were they doing?
Well, my father had started in 1946 in the Old Forester Distillery as a mash man. He worked on the mash floor and worked his way up into management. And my mother was a professional artist, so she worked in what was called advertising.
And where did you start out?
In the Old Forester Distillery.
On the mash floor, right?
Well, I did. I was in the grain lab, of all things.
You never got out of the lab, though, did you?
No, I tended to bum around the lab a lot, it seems.
What's been the biggest highlight of your career?
Well, that's a question I've been asked recently, of course, with all the wonderful circumstances. And if I have to say one thing, and it's not the creation of Double Oaked or the Masters Collection, I think it's the creation of Old Forester Birthday Bourbon back in 2002, which led to the renaissance, the rebirth of Old Forester. Since that's the company's founding brand, to have a hand in where it is today, I think is one of my top accomplishments.
How do you want to be remembered 50 years from now?
Well, 50 years from now, I don't think people will remember me, but I hope they continue to drink Old Forester and Wood Reserve. That'll be the best memory I can have.
Chris Morris was originally inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2017, but was in the hospital following a heart procedure and was unable to attend the ceremony. This year's ceremony is set for September 16th at Log Still Distillery. Brown-Forman has sold its now-closed cooperage in Louisville. Independent Stave bought the facility for $13.6 million, but has no plans to reopen the cooperage. It closed in April, eliminating more than 200 jobs as part of Brown-Forman's plan to reduce its workforce by 10% globally. It's believed Independent Stave will salvage the cooperage's equipment and sell the real estate in a separate deal. Suntory is doubling down on plans to use green hydrogen in Japan after a plan to convert Scotland's Auchentoshan distillery to hydrogen power fell through. The company will use hydrogen-fueled boilers to sterilize water at one of its plants in Japan and look at the feasibility of direct firing the stills at Hakushu Distillery with hydrogen. The Auchentoshan pilot project was scrapped after it failed to get UK government funding. We should note that the House of Suntory is a sponsor of WhiskyCast. From the Human Resources Department, WhistlePig Whiskey has named Fever Tree executive Charles Gibb as its new CEO. He takes over from Jeff Kozak, who left the Vermont-based distillery earlier this year. Gibb ran Fever Tree's North American operations for the past 8 years and previously served as CEO of Belvedere Vodka. Pernod Ricard has named Berry Brothers and Rudd Chief Commercial Officer Natalie Tennant as the new Managing Director of the Whisky Exchange. Current Managing Director Olivier Gasperin will return to Pernod Ricard headquarters in Paris. Tennant's portfolio will also include the independent bottler's specialty drinks and the Whisky.auction online auction site. Former Edrington executive Patricia Byatt has been named the head of spirits in Scotland for Bonhams. She was previously head of private clients for the Macallan based in Hong Kong. And the Glenturret Distillery's managing director is stepping down. Jenny Barenruther became managing director in March of last year after 17 years with specialty drinks. No word on a successor or her future plans. In other news, Ireland's Boan Distillery is expanding its reach into the U.S. for the first time. Head distiller Alex Witt previewed the 3 new Boan releases at a tasting Thursday night at the Dead Rabbit in New York City.
We're a relatively young distillery, only been operating about 5 years now. But the thing about Boan is that we want to make, primarily pot still Irish whiskey. So bringing back, a lot of old style or old recipes that Fiannan O'Connor has worked with, finding in the archives, bringing those back to life. But the thing is that we also like to pair the mash bill with the cask. So, whenever we release the Marsala, the pot still that you're going to be tasting tonight, we like to make the mash bill to pair with that whiskey. So adjusting the malt, adjusting the unmalted barley, oat sweetened rye to be able to make something that really pairs well with the type of whiskey.
The 3 releases are finished in Marsala, Madeira, and PX sherry casks and will be available in around 20 U.S. states at first. We'll hear more from Alex later in our Behind the Label segment. The move comes as alcohol consumption in Ireland is declining. A new report from the Drinks Industry Group of Ireland shows alcohol consumption per adult dropped by nearly 5% last year and is off by more than a third since 2001. The group's leaders say that since Irish drinkers are now consuming alcohol at average European levels, they should be paying excise duty at average European levels too. They'll argue for a 10% cut on excise duty in the next budget. Also out of Ireland, Ahascraig Distillery has released its first Bordeaux wine cask-finished whiskey, the Clancola 8-year-old. The Galway-based whiskey bonder blended malt and grain whiskies to create the final product, which is available through select retailers and whiskey shops, as well as the Ahascraig website. From Scotland, Tomatin Distillery is expanding its U.S. lineup with the latest addition to its core range. The 12-year-old sherry cask is not a finish, but was matured for all 12 years in ex-sherry casks. It'll be available nationwide. No word on pricing. Green River Distillery is opening its new tasting room in Louisville this week. The Lofted Spirits-owned distillery is also releasing a new special bourbon celebrating the 250th anniversary of the United States Army. Part of the proceeds from sales of the bourbon will go to charities supporting military families. We should note that Horse Soldier Bourbon has also released an Army 250th anniversary bottling. Diageo is reviving the Stitzel brand name for whiskeys matured at the Stitzel Weller Distillery's warehouses in Louisville. The first release in the Stitzel Reserve series is a 24-year-old bourbon that comes from 9 barrels that yielded only 191 bottles. They'll be available exclusively at the distillery's Garden and Gun Club for an undisclosed price. Sazerac is adding a 12-year-old bourbon to the Eagle Rare lineup. Eagle Rare 12-year-old will be available starting today with a recommended retail price of $49.99 a bottle. Willett Distillery has joined forces with Binder's Stash, which has been sourcing award-winning whiskeys from other distilleries until now. The partnership gives Binder's Stash access to Willett's barrel inventory and experimental mash bills. Wyoming Whiskey has unveiled this year's Wyoming-only release honoring Buffalo Bill Cody. It's a 6-year-old bourbon that went on sale this past week at Wyoming retailers for $79.99 a bottle. And finally, we remember Sir Jeff Palmer, who died this week. He was a grain scientist who discovered the barley abrasion process still used by distillers today and founded the International Centre for Brewing and Distilling at Heriot-Watt University in Scotland, where he served as Chancellor. Sir Jeff was the first black professor in Scotland and was equally well known for his human rights work. He wrote extensively on the history of the slave trade in Scotland and was knighted in 2014 for his services to human rights, science, and charity. Sir Jeff Palmer was 85 years old. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's open up the calendar and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. The Spirit of Toronto is hosting its inaugural Whisky A event featuring Canadian distilleries Friday night in Toronto. Bonham's Skinner has an auction of rare whiskeys on the 26th in Boston. The Aaron Malton Music Festival is the weekend of June 27th in La Cranza, Scotland. Hard Truth Distilling in Nashville, Indiana hosts the Charged Truth Live Fire Invitational Barbecue Cookout on the 27th and 28th. And the debut Asbury Park Beer, Wine, and Spirits Fest is June 28th in Asbury Park, New Jersey. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
Dewar's 19-year-old Champions Edition is more than just exceptional whiskey. It's a tribute to the U.S. Open Championship. Each year's limited edition release is crafted to honor the host course, integrating its spirit through a unique cask finish. For the 2025 tournament at Oakmont in Pennsylvania, Dewar's continues this tradition with an exceptional 19-year-old whiskey, double-aged, and finished in a way that nods to Pennsylvania's long-standing connection to apple brandy. Created by 6-time Master Blender of the Year Steffi McLeod, this year's edition is finished in Calvados apple brandy casks, imparting layers of green apples, apricots, citrus, warm spice, and a touch of honey. This isn't just a tribute, it's a masterclass in blending. Seek it out, savor every drop, and trust me, you'll be glad you did. Please enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2025, Dewar's is a trademark. Imported by John Dewar & Sons Company, Coral Gables, Florida. Blended Scotch whiskey, 43% alcohol by volume.
Sotheby's wrapped up its latest auction of American whiskeys on Thursday, and many of those whiskeys came from the collection of Mark Wade. He helped found the Vintage Whisky Society and is well known as a collector of vintage whiskeys from the pre-Prohibition era all the way up until the 50s and 60s. Sotheby's doesn't usually make its consigners available for interviews, but Mark Wade is the exception. We talked on a Zoom call the other day while the auction was still underway. How did you get into collecting vintage whiskeys in the first place?
Yeah, it started when I found it was about 1941, 1942 old Taylor bottle and bond. It was gifted to me by an uncle. It's covered in grime, but the tack strip was still intact. The fill level was solid. It was clear, didn't have a lot of sediment. And I knew that, some of these older dusty whiskeys, they preserve. Some people will pour them out and think you get sick off them, but that's not the case. Once they're in the bottle, it's not like wine where it continues to age or can kind of turn. Whiskey preserves. So I opened it and I tasted it, and what I found is something you can't get in the modern bottles: a funk, a depth, sense of time. That's what really hooked me.
Do you drink modern bottles?
I do. Yeah, I drink. I kind of go the full gamut. There are a lot of really interesting new releases. I do a lot of tours and meet a lot of distillers. I share a lot of I always try to tie the history when I meet up and share older, Prohibition, pre-Prohibition, World War II pours with them. I think that's where I've built a lot of really good relationships with a lot of the top scientists today that are out there really trying hard.
Tell me about the Vintage Whisky Society.
Yeah, it's really just a society that was put together by myself and a small group. It was founded by, I guess, the original three of us, and then has grown now to, we've got about 20, 25 members. And we, in the group sort of just have sort of a private message group going, offering tastings. And somebody will say, hey, for example, the next tasting I'm doing is we're going to open over 20 Old Crow bottles, Hermitage Old Crow, ranging from 1880 up to 1940. And so you'll just get a chance to try and do a focus. And we'll share history. We'll talk about James Crow, how his ties to Old Oscar Pepper Stag, what his legacy was, his formulas, the sour mash ideas. So it's kind of a bit of exploring how American history and American whiskey intertwine so deeply.
How did you get into this in the first place?
I mean, it just grew growing up in Tennessee, was always around people who were finding older bottles and trying them and talking about the different brands. And, when this kind of Japanese movement started coming back to the South, some of the Julian Van Winkle, Marcy stuff that was happening, I was kind of one of those earlier adopters in the 98, 2000 era, getting a lot of that from family and friends. And then I spent some time overseas, and, even then I was finding and hunting, always had a passion and taste for it. So, and then when I came back, and I currently reside in Indiana, I did a lot of work in healthcare, and I was a lot of time in Kentucky, and I just meet a lot of physicians and different healthcare providers that were part of distillery families. And they say, oh, I have this bottle at the house. And we just kept on trading and moving. And I was just always willing. I just think, whiskey is meant to be opened and shared. It's a great way to experience something, experience time, experience the past. And so that passion just continues to grow.
Do you ever open a bottle and think, this is $10,000 I'm drinking right now?
Well, it used to not be. That's changed. Now it's getting a little bit like, yeah, sometimes you wonder, like, for example, I bet you we're opening over $100,000 worth of bottles in, a couple of weeks here. But, at the end of the day, it's one of those things where I think, I try not to focus on dollar value and more on the uniqueness and experience and the flavors of the pour and what I'm sharing and learning from it. And when you split that in a group and you're kind of like getting into this world, if you're a bit of a nerd like I am around it, I think it just doesn't pop up to the top of your mind.
You really are drinking liquid history, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not just looking for like rarity or different. I'm looking for meaning in these bottles, right? To me, it's like a small act of preservation. We're rescuing forgotten American history and culture. And when you open with your friends, that's the point. Whiskey was never meant to sit on a shelf. It was meant to be shared and enjoyed. Back in the day, where the rise of the yesteryear in the 19th century, where it was the workers in the field that paid for the Gibsons and the red top and these really fantastic, robust burpee ryes. And then it was our troops, that demanded quality bottle and bonds, and pushing out the Prohibition era into this kind of glut of where everything consolidated down. But man, they were really finding a lot of whiskey that had longer time to age because they couldn't sell it. And so getting access to that is special to me.
Are you still finding older bottles?
Yeah, I find them all the time. Yeah, it's crazy. Like, it's a lot of times it's someone who just passed away. Maybe the husband passed away and the widow didn't really touch it and just stayed there for a while, or estate sales. I was not too long ago, less than a year ago, I went to the Chapin and Gore estate sale in Louisville. And I had just a tremendous amount of bottles of Stag, and that actually the Dowling 8 years in this auction came from that estate sale. I have test line bottles up on the shelf here from that estate sale. It was like the test line, meaning like first batch productions that he bottled and kept, and that became Double Springs and ORS and some of these like old Jim Gore Chapin here.
How do you research the history of these bottles?
Well, it's gotten progressively easier now, ChatGPT, to be honest with you, because there's a really great website, PreProMen. I lean heavily on that for a lot of it, because it is difficult when you go back as far as some of these bottles go. Like, we opened a bottle from 1849 last year from Ohio, and it was very difficult to research that bottle, to be honest with you. But it's gotten, as the research has been done by people out there like Laura and Kurt and Halil and a lot of these guys that are out there that really putting the time in, and ladies, it's the information is becoming more available on the Facebook groups, on the websites, and then it's kind of progressing into now with the AI tools, it's becoming progressively easier.
How do you verify the authenticity of some of these old bottles? Because it would be easy to fake them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know if it's easy to fake them, but so like these, like this is a Rip Van Winkle Blanton bottle, right? And so, it's got these tips up taps, but you've got these tamper-proof under seals plus the tax strip. It'd be very difficult to put all that back together. Plus, then you get the tax stamps on them, the old paper labels under the lift. Looking at the glass bottoms, the type of glass, the label, you can really take a look at these, and it is something that you could. I mean, anybody, I guess anything technically could be counterfeited. But so you start with that stuff, but then it's really, then I have, for me, I have a group and I just kind of circulate pictures and we all try to pick it apart. We look for anything. But I think at the end of the day, if you see you should know generally the color liquid by looking online and seeing what the bottles look like that haven't been opened. There's a lot of forums with open bottles and pictures you can use. Then it's the glass, understanding the air of the glass production, the numbers on the bottom. You can Google all that. The tax strips are very telling. There's going to be often stamps on the bottle that are from the state. Like this one here has a state tax stamp on it. I think it says Missouri. And then, the actual paper is different with the lift. It is a lot to put together and try to fake if you were. I think it's a much easier thing to fake the newer allocated bottles. And frankly, the allocated bottles sell for more anyways, some of this newer kind of like rare stuff. So I think that's much bigger concern for counterfeit than the dusties.
What have you not been able to find that you'd like to get your hands on?
The number one hunt is I'd like to try to find a full Prohibition medicinal ball and bond pint cabin still. Got pictures of one and only one. I've never been able to find it. This one was 1943. So this is later. So I'm looking for somewhere between 1918 to 1932. bottled, cabin still, bottle and bond. So anybody has that, please call me.
It seems like you're having a lot of fun doing this.
Oh yeah, this is a passion. This is not anything I've made money off of or anything that's this is not my main. I work in healthcare, but this is just something I've fallen in love with, and it's you think about George Washington ran one of the largest distilleries. The Whiskey Rebellion. I have an actual first edition copy of The Great Whiskey Heist, which is a fascinating story of how politics, crime, and culture intermixed. The stories of Mount Vernon and even and now the more modern stories of how the Van Winkle family pioneered and fought so much. And there's a large community growing. And now you get places in Kentucky you can go get pours like Revival and Neat. What Brad Bonds and Owen are doing is fantastic to me. So I just think it's a great community. It's a great way to explore history, ties everything, and I think once people kind of get into it, it's hard to get out of. I think it's really one of those unique, fun things that is very American and very enjoyable.
Do you have a category that you specialize in, say pre-Prohibition whiskeys or Prohibition-era whiskeys?
Yeah, I would say I really went deep on the medicinal pints. And that's probably the most time I spent on. I think I built one of the biggest, if not the biggest, medicinal pint collections. Everyone was, clear liquid, full, and I opened probably twice as many. So and shared and so I think I got became kind of the guy for that. And so I get a lot of that handed to me still, which is why, for example, I found several crates, but we were talking right before this a bit about the Mary Dowling. There was a bootlegging town in Minnesota, and there was a vault where a family, a gentleman passed away. The widow, when she passed away, family found over 100 pints of Dowling P.H. Stitzel whiskey, still in the original crates. And so I was able to go up there and help them they were pouring them out, and they had a bunch in the back of a dump truck when I showed up. So. They didn't realize, it was something you could actually enjoy. So I think that's where I have been probably the most successful and enjoyed had the most fun.
For those of us who will never get to taste one of these whiskeys, what do they taste like compared to today's whiskeys?
Sure. It's one of those things where the process was on slower stills. They were aged longer. The demand was lower back then. And they're, mostly family run. And they use local grain yeast that simply no longer exist. You get that. There's inconsistencies bottle to bottle. There's pre-industrialized flavors that I don't think can be reproduced, and the funk even from the wood and how that wood, and now think about the barrels even and the wood that was used and how much older that is. So I think what you get is often almost like a sweet heat, long hugs with something that sort of, you could go through the tobacco, cinnamon, cherry type notes that kind of are consistently across. So there are a lot of really amazing distillers today. There's a lot of really amazing, creative bourbon makers, but I think this idea of this slower process, the longer aging and the grains and yeast that are hard to recreate today. I think, that funk and that robustness is always something you're going to get with these bottles that is hard to recreate today.
Thanks to Vintage Whiskey Society co-founder Mark Wade for joining us this week on WhiskyCast In-Depth, and for letting Sotheby's pour some of his rare whiskeys at a media tasting a couple of weeks ago before the auction started. One of those old whiskeys was a 1917 Old Granddad, bottled for medicinal purposes in 1932 at 15 years of age. It was a bottled-in bond whiskey at 50% ABV, and the nose has touches of cola, milk chocolate, malted milk ball candies, and a hint of cherries. The taste had notes of cherries, menthol, baking spices, and oak tannins, and the finish was long and spicy. Scoring it against today's whiskeys really isn't fair, but I'd give it an 80. Next up, the Dewar's Champions Edition 19-year-old 2025 blended Scotch. It's finished in apple brandy Calvados barrels and bottled at 43% ABV. The nose has touches of cinnamon apples, subtle spices, and a honey sweetness. The taste has a nice balance of red apples, cinnamon, pear candies, and honeysuckle, and the finish is long with a nice touch of apples. I'm scoring the Dewar's 2025 Champions Edition a 92, and we need to mention that Dewar's is a sponsor of WhiskyCast. Now let's look at the new 7-year-old Old Fitzgerald Bottled in Bond Bourbon. Of course, it's bottled at 50% ABV, and the nose has touches of oak and caramel balanced by soft spices, honey, and dark chocolate. The taste is full of baking spices with red apples, dark chocolate, oak, and caramel in the background, and the finish is long with touches of cinnamon, black pepper, and dark chocolate. I'm scoring the Old Fitzgerald 7-year-old Bottled in Bond Bourbon a 92. Finally, Bowen's Alex Witt mentioned his Marsala finished single-pot still Irish whiskey during the news. It's bottled at 47% ABV, and the nose has dried fruits, honey, soft spices, and just a hint of ginger. The taste is spicy and tart with fresh fruits, white pepper, ginger, dried flowers, and honey, while the finish is long and tart with a lingering touch of white pepper. I'm scoring it a 92. I'll be adding these whiskeys to our searchable list of nearly 3,900 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskyCast.com. Let's open up the inbox now and see what people are talking about this week in our community segment. After I posted the news about the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame class of 2025 this week, we had a comment from Hugo Dart in Brazil. A very impressive list. It's nice that the contributions of all those people are being acknowledged. Ian Bruce also chimed in from Australia. Great to read that Mary Dowling has been recognized in this list. Amen to that. I posted a photo of the 2 bottles of the Champions Edition that Dewar's sent over this week on social media, and Dame Minch replied on X, "The 2023 edition was one of my favorite pours ever. Excited to try this one. Hope you get to try it soon. If you have something you'd like to add to the conversation, download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store and join the conversation. You can also find us on social media. Look for WhiskyCast on Blue Sky, X, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. I mentioned on social media the other night that I was attending the Bowen whiskey tasting at the Dead Rabbit, and Sean Stevens posted this on Facebook. I'd like to know what their secret in the line arms is. The only thing I can think of is some sort of copper mesh, corkscrew maybe. Well, I asked Alex Witt to explain, and it's not a copper mesh of sorts. Think a lot smaller, like nano size.
The best way to explain nanotechnology is essentially it's a copper paint that they spray on or spray inside of the neck and the line arm of all 3 of our stills. And what that does is that it creates a rough surface inside of the still. So when you have a rough surface, that increases the surface area, which then increases the copper contact that the wash has with the copper. So you're able to pull out a lot more sulfur out of your fermented wash as opposed to maybe a smooth-sided still. So it's sort of like noise-canceling headphones of whiskey. So whenever you're able to pull out that much more sulfur, you're able to detect a lot more, very subtle, very soft, fruity esters out of the spirit as you would otherwise.
And who came up with this?
So the manufacturer of the stills is Green Engineering. He made the stills. It's a patented technology, and we are able to get, I think it's 6.5 times more copper contact as opposed to a still without nanotechnology.
Thanks to Alex Witt for the explanation, and if you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us, download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store, or find us on social media. We're on Blue Sky, X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Discover the 2025 limited release of Dewar's 19-Year-Old Champions Edition, finished in Calvados apple brandy casks, a perfect fusion of craftsmanship and tradition. Here's to great whiskey and the game that inspires it.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2025, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.